All right, so once again, thank you everyone for joining. Our presentation, as I mentioned today, is on Intergy POMIS and utilizing the appointment scheduler module. Some of the items that we're going to talk about in our presentation today is the user toolbar inside of Intergy POMIS and how to move around or modify that toolbar for the user's preference as it pertains to the appointment scheduler. Once we go into the scheduler itself, I'll show you some navigation, how to properly navigate and interpret the appointment window. We'll go ahead and actually go through the process of scheduling a new appointment. We'll walk through the steps of canceling and rescheduling as well. There is a link for existing appointments, so we'll take a look at that and how you can view patients' appointments through that link. We'll talk about how to do an appointment search. And Intergy also has an advanced search option, so we'll take a look at both and what the difference from each other would be. Towards the end of the presentation, we're also going to talk about some reports pertaining to the appointment scheduler. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with user preferences as it pertains to the scheduler itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at Intergy directly. So as I mentioned, the first thing that I want to show you is in regards to the toolbar. So as a standard, the appointment scheduler icon is already part of your toolbar, but perhaps you want to modify the toolbar or rearrange the appointment scheduler icon within the toolbar. Your workflow, perhaps you want to modify that icon pertaining to your workflow and your role in the organization. So here in my toolbar, I'm already logged into Intergy, and my toolbar icon is the little appointment calendar icon. So it's typically right up at the front, usually about the 4th or the 5th icon, and you can very well change that. To modify the user toolbar, you're going to go ahead and access the options menu. And underneath the options menu, you're going to click on user toolbar. So the list on the left are all the available icons that Intergy has that you can have on your toolbar. And the list on the right is how your toolbar looks like currently, the options that you have currently. And you have a preview of your toolbar at the bottom as it looks like right now. So as I mentioned earlier, the appointment scheduler is a default to be on your toolbar automatically. But again, if you wanted to move it around, perhaps you're part of the call center and appointment schedule is one of the first icons that you want to see. You can always click on the calendar and then use your up arrow to bring it closer to the front of the list or the front of that row. So again, all I did here was click on my calendar icon if it's already on my toolbar, and then use the up arrow, and that just brings it up closer in your toolbar if that's what you prefer. If the icon is not on your toolbar, then you would have to search for it here on the left and click select to bring it to the right. So customizing the toolbar definitely optimizes your workflow, and you can set up the toolbars pertaining to your role and what makes it easier for you on a day-to-day basis. So as you can see, my appointment scheduler icon is the first one on the list. And these are user preferences, so the setting, the change that I just made only applies to me, not to everyone else. Also, as a reminder, accessing the scheduler itself is a security feature. So in your user rights, you have to have access to the scheduler. So if you do not have access to the scheduler right now, please notify your center MIS, your IT personnel, or your direct supervisor and manager, and let them know. It is part of security, so you have to have the rights to access that module. So let's take a look at the scheduler module. So again, we can either go through the icon or we can go through the scheduling menu itself. Obviously, the icon itself does save you a couple clicks. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the navigation, how to interpret what we're actually seeing here in this window before we actually move on to scheduling an appointment. I want you to understand what you're seeing rather than just jumping straight into making an appointment. So as I work clockwise here, the first thing that you see here on the left is your scheduler, is the calendar, I should say. So the gray box indicates the day that you're currently on. You can navigate within this calendar. I can pick another day by clicking on that day, or I can navigate from month to month or year to year if that was the case. Whenever you select a particular day, then the schedule that you're looking at is pertaining to that day. And you can clearly see that here at the top in bold print. So I have selected May 24th, therefore at the top of my calendar it says May 24th. You may have noticed as I jump into future dates, this little button right underneath my calendar, the wording changes. So right now I am looking at May 26th appointments or day. Therefore, my button now reads Go to Today. So that's like using that button is like a quick jump between today's date and the last future date that you clicked on. So if you are continuously giving appointments for 30 days from now, 30 days from now, or 2 weeks from now, if you're continuously giving appointments for the same time, this is a quick button that allows you to toggle between today and that future date. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it now. And as I click on the Go to Today button, you're going to see that I am now on April 25th, which is today's date. But look at what it reads now. Now it says Go to May 26th because that's the last future date that I clicked on. So it's a quick toggle between that future date and today's date. So what that will do is just eliminate the process of you having to manually pick that date. To the right of that is the provider. So the schedule that I'm looking right now for April 25th is for Dr. David Ford. He is my default provider or the provider that automatically pops up on my schedule. There is a preference tied to that, which I'll be showing you in just a second, where the system can default to the last doctor I clicked on or the doctor that I'm scheduling based on who the patient is assigned to. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then to the right of that, we talked about how we're currently looking at April 25th, and underneath that is just another way for me to manipulate my schedule view here. I can choose to view just my morning appointments, my afternoon, or my full day. So for those centers that have very busy schedules, perhaps you can cut your day in half, and that way your list isn't as long. Or perhaps it's already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Therefore, I don't need to be scrolling down my morning appointments to get to my afternoon appointment. That would be a reason why to maybe bubble in PM. As you can see, if I bubble in PM, I am only looking at my after 12 PM appointments. My morning ones are hiding. And that just makes it of a cleaner view in this screen. So you can definitely change those need be. To the right of that is mode. And mode is like different views of your schedule. So the one we're looking at right now is mode 1. It's called resource details. And I'm also going to later talk about some user preferences that are tied to that mode. So resource detail pretty much shows you everything about that appointment. So let's take a look at our 9:45 sample that we have here. It's telling us the appointment time, which is 9:45, the location of where that appointment will be, the patient who's actually scheduled for that time, the minutes, the length of that appointment, the class and the reason code of that appointment, and the patient's primary insurance, if any. So it tells me quite a bit of that appointment because I'm looking at resource detail. I happen to have 2 appointments at 9:45, which is this Carla patient that we have here. So that's why you see them right underneath each other. They're both 9:45 appointments. Aside from a scheduled patient, which is my 9:45, take a look at my other slots, like 10 a.m. or 10:30. All you're going to see, when a patient hasn't been scheduled yet, all you're going to see is the reason that was designated or set up for that time slot. So all these other colored slots that you see, again, new patient, established patient, standard office visit, lunch, admin and charting, all those are reasons that were tied to that slot. All that comes from the setup. So if you're working with a provider's template that is blank, that there's no reasoning or no class assigned to that slot, please notify your administrator immediately, your immediate supervisor, because the template is missing some setup. Every single slot that you work with must be set up with an appointment class, an appointment reason. It should not be blank. Okay? So the way that this provider's template has been set up is to have certain type of appointments at certain times throughout the day. Now, can you change that? Absolutely. If 9 a.m. was designated just for new patients, but I'm trying to force an established patient in there, it can very well be done. However, you have to have the rights to do so. There has to be prior approval for you to do that. And there has to be security rights for you to do that as well. So resource mode 1, resource details, pretty much shows you everything about today's list of appointments. Shows you quite a bit of information. Right underneath mode 1, it says collapse. And what collapse means, it means not to show you your double booked or your triple booked. So take a look at my 9:45. Remember, there's 2 patients scheduled at 9:45. So if I click on collapse, it just shows me my first patient at 9:45, but it tells me, it gives me a number column, I should say, and it says that there's 2 there. So that means that visual number 2 is telling me that there's 2 patients at 9:45. I just can't see who that second patient is because I have collapsed my view. So having it collapsed, unless you're on a different mode, which we'll see that in just a second, it's typically not the case there, but do know the options there. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the box, and the names come back. Mode 1 is definitely the more common view for the appointment schedule, so it's definitely not the only mode. I can go ahead and click on my drop-down and change it to resource conflicts. So what resource conflict's going to do, this view allows me to see my double booked time slots. If you recall, back on mode 1, my double booked appointments were right underneath each other. In the resource conflict mode 2, they're right next to each other. So visually, it does look better, you know, when the patients are right next to each other versus right underneath. Ultimately, it's based on the user preference also. So again, my 9:45 is double booked, so they're right next to each other. So the term conflict in Intergy means double booking, triple booking. As a reminder, Intergy does have that capability, as you can see, for double booking or triple booking, but ultimately it all applies to, it all goes down to if you have approval to do so, if your organization allows it, and if you have the right to do so. It is a security feature to be able to cause conflicts or create conflicts. So you have to have the right to do so. So just as a reminder, the term conflict means double booking. We also have a different mode, mode 3. Mode 3 means multiple days. So if the patient's looking to schedule an appointment within the next week, jump to mode 3. That way you're looking at multiple days across the board, rather than jumping day by day. So the system does show the next 5 business days. It is known that many of our centers do have a weekend schedule, but unfortunately this mode does not account for a weekend schedule. It just does Monday through Friday. So it's looking at the next 5 business days as of today. So we're seeing today's schedule and the next 4 days, excluding a weekend. If I'm looking at the week of May 2nd or May 1st, then I'm looking at that entire week. So multiple days shows me the next 5 days, depending on where you are in the calendar. Mode 4. Mode 4 is called multiple resources. And this is referencing the resource groups. And this does take some maintenance and setup. So in your organization, after today's training, if you go back to your multiple resources and you do see some discrepancies of providers, then please report that to your immediate supervisor, your IT personnel, so they can make any adjustments there. So the resource group does have some maintenance involved, it does have some setup involved, and the purpose of multiple resources is for me perhaps to see multiple providers across the board. So instead of just working off of mode 1 and jumping from provider to provider to provider that way, why not utilize multiple resources, and I can see multiple providers across the board. Now, as I mentioned, it's all dependent on what was set up. For example, here's a resource group drop-down right here. These are some examples of what resource providers or resource groups could be. There's an example of all providers. So you can set up all your providers as a resource group. Some organizations do it by specialty. Perhaps you have multiple peds. Perhaps you have multiple family providers, multiple OBGYNs. I can create different groups for each of those specialties as well. Some of our organizations have also used it perhaps tied to language. I can create a resource group for Spanish-speaking providers or Creole-speaking providers. That way, when I'm going to schedule this patient and the patient perhaps doesn't have a preference of who they see, if they're new, I can click on my drop-down, pull up my providers, or that group I should say, and now I'm looking at 3 different provider schedules in one window, rather than jumping provider by provider. So don't forget that you have these mode options that make your process a lot easier as you're scheduling. Lastly, another option that we have here is mode 5, and this is a monthly view. The monthly view allows me to see productivity per day, if you will. Wherever you see the little teal colored bar, that kind of shows you the amount of appointments that are on that day already. So again, if the patient doesn't have a preference of what day to come in on a particular week, perhaps you can jump into mode 5 and schedule that patient on your least scheduled day to try to fill up a certain day. Let's take a look here at on April 6th here. As you can see, it says the number 2 meaning that I have 2 patients scheduled that day so far. If I hover over it, if I hover over the bar, it says that that provider, the provider David Ford, which is the one selected here at the top, so far has 2 appointments. He's 11% filled. He is scheduled to see patients 9 to 5 that day. I can jump to a future date. And as you can see, if there's no patient scheduled on a particular day, it's completely blank. So if you're trying to fill a certain day, use the monthly view as a reference for that. So those are your 5 different scheduler views, modes, that you have access to. Once we go into the user preferences later on, I will be showing you how you can default a mode that perhaps you rather see or default to often enough. So here on the far left, we have a selected patient box, a little yellow box. The patient's name that is in that yellow box is the last patient that you selected, and it's technically the patient that you're about to schedule an appointment for. So if I try to schedule an appointment now, the system may think that I'm trying to schedule from Brian Abner. I can change that, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Right above the patient's name is my magnifying glass. So if I don't want to schedule an appointment for Brian Abner because he's the patient that's in my box, I can click on the magnifying glass and find the patient. So if you work at the call center or you continuously make appointment for patients, perhaps that's how you're quickly going to jump into another patient to make an appointment, by clicking on the magnifying glass. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And let's say that the patient I need to make an appointment for is Carla Abner. I can find Carla's name, or I can find this patient by their name, by their home or cell phone number. I can search for the patient by date of birth. Those are some of the common ones that we utilize in patient searches. So let's say Carla Abner is the patient that I need to make an appointment for. So now that I've selected her name is now on the yellow box. So now the system assumes that any appointment I create right now will be for Carla Abner. And that's one way that you can toggle from patient to patient when you're scheduling, by using your magnifying glass. To the bottom left, these are some action buttons that you'll have access to while you're scheduling appointments or you're trying to view details of an appointment. So as we go through the training, I will be able to show you the different purposes or uses of these action buttons as we go through scheduling, rescheduling, etc. So let's take a look at actually scheduling an appointment here. So before you even schedule the patient, the first thing you need to determine, obviously, is what day are you going to schedule the patient for. So you're going to navigate within your calendar to find that future appointment date. So let's say it's for May 1st. the next thing you're going to do is identify who is this appointment with. Is it with a provider? Is it for your lab tech? Is it for a lab-only appointment? And I'll show you how in just a second how to toggle between both. And then you need to determine at what time is that patient going to come in. So if I leave it as is, that means I'm going to schedule Brian Abner for Monday, May 1st with Dr. David Ford. If any of that is different, then you need to change it. Perhaps change the date, change the patient, or change the provider. As I mentioned earlier, there is a preference. There is a user preference where I can dictate the provider's name that's there, either as a default or based on the patient's assigned provider. Now, as I mentioned, what if it's not a provider's appointment? A lot of our organizations use the room feature in the appointment scheduler for lab-only appointments or for injections or PPDs. So you don't have to necessarily make an appointment for a provider. You can make an appointment for a room. So for the organizations that use that, that's technically two different schedules. So maybe the patient needs to see the doctor in 3 weeks. That will be a provider appointment. If the patient needs to come in a week before that for labs, meaning 2 weeks from now, then that would be a lab room. That's if your organization has it set up that way. So how do we change it from a provider schedule to a lab schedule? Well, you need to change the resource. So right now, our default resource is provider. So if you come up here and click on resource and change it to room, then you're going to be able to select your lab room. And again, this is our training environment, so you're going to see quite a few here that we use for testing purposes. But you would have a room here called lab, and that's where you will schedule your lab-only appointments. So essentially, that's two different schedules. Any patient scheduled, properly scheduled, in the lab room will not interfere with the provider schedule. If you want to toggle back to the provider, you're going to go back to resource, back to provider, and that brings you back to Dr. David Ford's schedule. All right, so let's go ahead and actually schedule our patient, Brian Abner. So again, I picked my patient. That's why their name is on the yellow box. I picked the day that the patient wants to be seen. And I'm already on the provider that the patient needs to be seen with. If it's a different provider, you can just type in the code of that provider or click on your drop down to find the provider that way. So now let's say that the patient needs to come in the morning. Let's say we want to schedule the patient for 10 a.m. in the morning. Now, the way you actually make the appointment, ultimately it's your preference. There's more, the nice thing about Intergy is that there's more than one way of doing the same thing. So to actually schedule Brian at 10 a.m., I can either double click right over 10 a.m. That's one way. Or I can right click over 10 a.m. and choose make appointment. Or I can click on 10 a.m. like to highlight it and then click my action button on the bottom left to make the appointment. So as you can see, there's many different ways of scheduling that appointment, and ultimately you use the one that you feel more comfortable with, or the one that you prefer. I'm just going to go ahead and double click on 10 a.m. Once you select the time slot that you're going to schedule the patient for, the Make Appointment window will appear. Now, if your organization's appointment templates for these providers are properly set up, there's very little that you need to enter in this window. A lot of the fields that we're going to go through in this window should already be defaulted for you. And I'll be sure to point those out as we go through them. So the first thing you see at the top are two radio buttons. Because this is a patient, because I scheduled or I chose a patient, this is a patient appointment. You have the option of bubbling in non-patient. Some organizations use that for like a block, a quick time block on the schedule. As you can see, my patient's name is already on that window because I pre-selected the patient in the back window. You still have access to the little magnifying glass here. So if I click on that little magnifying glass and change my patient while I'm in that window. Remember, the patient in the little yellow box is the patient that the system assumes you're about to make an appointment for. So if you went this far and then realized you're on the wrong patient, you can click on the magnifying glass and change your patient. You don't necessarily have to close this window and start all over. The reason class. If you recall moments ago, I mentioned that the appointment scheduler is already set up for you with time slot reasonings. So for 10 a.m. for Dr. Abner, it says that he is to see established patients at that time. So that is why my reason class already says established patient. What I need to choose is the reason code of why the patient is being seen. Now, these are general reason codes, and it definitely does vary from center to center. Some common examples is well woman visit, well child visit, sick child visit, established patient complex. It really varies, but what do you see that it is common between all of them is that they're general reason. The reason code will not necessarily be a headache or an earache or back pain. We're not going to be that specific in our reason codes. We will be broad in the reason code itself. So that list will vary from center to center. I'm just going to go ahead and choose follow-up visit here for training purposes. As you can see, the length has defaulted. All this is because of the way it's set up behind the scenes. The appointment scheduler should already be set up for you in terms of length. You should not find yourself changing the length of an appointment. If you do, please just notify your immediate supervisor or your IT personnel because we need to take another look at the appointment scheduler template setup. So because I chose follow-up visits, it does default to a 15-minute appointment. So just for training purposes, as you can see, there's other options here, if that was the case. I can choose any other different reason code pertaining to what the patient's coming in for. Appointment class. Any field that you see that's labeled class is strictly used for reporting purposes. So if your organization is using the appointment class to group together appointments based on like items or based on similarities, that will perhaps be an appointment class. And all it is to be able to run reports. It's like a filtering option in reports. To the right-hand side, a lot of this already default for you. You should not have to change that. Again, if it is, we need to reevaluate your appointment template setup. So the date is already there for you because that's one of the first things that we picked. Provider, the provider code is already there for you because that's the provider that we chose to schedule the patient with. And the location is already there for you. Something else that you shouldn't have to worry about because it's part of the setup. When this provider's template was created for Mondays, it was automatically created that he will be at that location on that kind of day and that time. You should not have to change that. And the rest will you typically be blank when you are scheduling a patient with a provider. The room field, you're really only using room or selecting room instead of provider when you are in that room schedule for the lab only, for example, as we saw earlier. There's also a field for referrals. If your organization is using the referral module in Intergy, you can link referrals to an appointment itself. For example, an authorization that's associated to the referral. Notes. You definitely want to use notes. You want to use it because you can see them from the EHR side. So this is where we could be a little bit more specific of why the patient's being seen. So we know that the reason code is established patient, but here we can write why. Perhaps it's lab results. Perhaps it's they're coming in for a certain reason, back pain. I can write all those details here, and it will reflect on the EHR side of Intergy so that the provider and the support staff are better prepared for that appointment and understand the appointment a little bit more ahead of time, rather than just knowing that it's an established patient. As you can see, I have access to the appointment, the phone numbers right from here as well, and these can be edited, need be. You also have access to the questionnaire. Questionnaire is another module that we have in Intergy, where you can create a list of questions that perhaps you should be asking your patients while an appointment is being scheduled. So the questionnaires is a list of questions that you build, a template that you build in Intergy, and we can associate it to the appointment and refer back to those answers here inside of Intergy PAMIS. Unfortunately, you can't see them from the EHR side, but they can be accessed from PAMIS. So as you can see, I've entered the details of my appointment, that is. I've done very little because everything came from the setup. All I needed to worry about really is the reason code and the notes. Pretty much everything else was there already. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And my patient is scheduled. If I was trying to double book my 10 a.m. because there was a patient there already, at that point I would have received some messages. And I'll show you that in just a second as well. If I was trying to force a new patient appointment on a slot that was reserved for established, I will also receive other warning messages. And throughout our training, I'll definitely prompt those warning messages so you can see them. So the next couple of things that I want to show you is how to cancel and reschedule. Towards the end of our training, we'll recap on some basic steps that we are covering, how to make an appointment. We'll recap those steps. But we're going to go ahead and move on now into canceling an appointment and rescheduling. So they're definitely two different things, and you're ultimately going to choose the one that's applicable to the patient. So if the patient is scheduled and they call in to say they cannot make it today, that they want to come next week instead, that is a reschedule process. If you have a patient that calls in and says they cannot make it to today's appointment and they will call you back for a future appointment, then that is just cancel. So do know there are two different processes in Intergy, cancel and reschedule, and I'm going to go ahead and show you both. The first scenario that I want to show you is how to reschedule an appointment. And there's really more than one place where you can do that also. So the two areas that I want to show you on how to reschedule an appointment, the first way is if you're on that appointment already. So let's say Brian Abner called in and he knows exactly when he's scheduled. He says, I am scheduled for May 1st at 10 a.m. You can jump directly to that day and see his appointment on May 1st at 10 a.m. So this is what I mean by actually being on the appointment itself, because you're highlighting it. If I want to reschedule Brian Abner's appointments from here, all I need to do is right-click over his name, right-click over his appointment, and choose Reschedule. That's one way to do it. Another way to reschedule Brian Abner's appointment is, let's say you were not on the schedule. You're not on May 1st. Perhaps Brian Abner does not remember when he's coming in. So you're going to have to search for it. The way that you can search for it, if you're already on the appointment module itself, you're going to select Brian's name here on the little yellow box. And you're going to put his name on the yellow box. So you're going to click on the magnifying glass. You're going to search for Brian's name. And now his name is on the selected patient yellow box. So again, I can either reschedule by right-clicking right over the appointment, if you've already located it, or you can search for Brian and follow the steps I'm going to show you now. So because Brian has appointments scheduled, take a look at right underneath his name. It says existing appointments. The moment the patient has a appointment scheduled in Intergy, that link will always appear under the patient's name from the scheduler. Whether it's a current appointment or an upcoming future appointment, it will say existing. If the patient did not have any scheduled appointments in Intergy, whether it's current or future, you will not see that link. You will not see the words existing appointment. So that's an automatic given that they don't have any upcoming appointments. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the link for existing appointments for Brian Abner. And it automatically brings me to his appointments. As you can see, this patient has 2 appointments. One on the 25th that has been canceled. The status all the way to the right says canceled. And one on May 1st that's upcoming. The system always, if the patient happens to have more than one appointment in this history or in this list, the system will always highlight the first one. So be very mindful to highlight the one that you're actually trying to cancel or the one that you're actually trying to reschedule. So be very mindful to select the right one. A lot of organizations use Intergy for multiple specialties, behavioral health, family practice, peds, dental. So those are all different appointments that the patient can have in Intergy. So you want to make sure you're canceling the right or rescheduling the right one. So if I highlight May 1st, take a look at the bottom of the screen. It gives me a little bit more information about that appointment, so I can make sure I'm rescheduling the right one. It tells me when they're coming in. It actually shows who actually created that appointment. So it shows me all the details about it. And at the bottom, it shows me the notes. The one dated 4/25, all the way to the right, it says it's canceled. So the system keeps in memory all the appointments that the patient has in history. So going back to our reschedule process, I went into existing appointments. I highlighted the May 1st appointment because that's the one the patient wants to reschedule. And on the bottom right, I'm going to click on Reschedule. The system will immediately prompt me to selecting the reason why. Why is the patient rescheduling, or why is the appointment being rescheduled? There are different patient rescheduled codes, or rescheduled codes, I should say. If you click on the drop-down, you will see the different ones. Typically, the system will come with 2 or 3 standard ones, like patient canceled, office canceled, but perhaps your organization has added more to the list to better define why the appointment was rescheduled. So if the patient's the one that called in to reschedule, then obviously that's patient rescheduled. If the provider called out, the provider's appointments need to be moved, and it's the office that's initiating the reschedule, then that would be office reschedule. You can go as far as actually writing a little bit more notes if you wanted to of why the patient rescheduled. And that would be optional. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now here, take a look here on my bottom left. Rescheduling is actually a 2-step process. So the first process is what we just did, telling the system that the patient wants to reschedule. So basically what the system did now is just grab that appointment and it wants to know where to put it. So now we have to do step 2. So now it wants to know where to actually move the appointment to. That's why you see the message there that says reschedule in progress, because it's holding on to that appointment from May 1st, and now you need to tell it where to put it. Where are you rescheduling it to? If the patient changed their mind or you accidentally picked the wrong day, you can click on Stop Reschedule and stop the process of this rescheduled appointment if that was the case. But I want to continue, so I'm going to go ahead and actually reschedule this appointment. So that we're moving the appointment from May 1st to another day. So let's say that other day is May 4th. So what you're going to do now is jump to that day that the patient needs to reschedule for. You can use your different modes if you have to. Use your different views if you have to. So if I go into multiple days here, I can look at the entire week, and it will allow me to better communicate with the patient in telling them what availability we have, because I'm looking at multiple days here rather than one day at a time. So from this view, I can offer the patient different available slots within the entire week. So let's say that the patient has agreed to, or that we are moving the patient to May 4th. It is still under Dr. David Ford. and we're going to move it to 10 a.m. So the next process is pretty much the same steps I showed you when we created that appointment from scratch. You can either double click at 10 a.m., you can right click and make it, or you can highlight and click make. So at this point, you're going to follow the steps of actually scheduling from scratch. So I'm just going to double click on the 10 a.m. slot and take a look at my screen. It now says reschedule appointment. My window now says reschedule appointment. And everything that was on that original appointment is now crossing over to my rescheduled one. So it knows that it's still an established patient, and it brought over the notes that were on the original appointment also. You're going to have access to edit pretty much any of these fields except the provider field. So if everything else is still the same, my notes are still the same, if everything else is still the same, I'm just simply going to save this window here. And now my appointment went from May 1st to May 4th. So if I quickly jump to May 1st here, my 10 a.m. slot is now freed up for a future appointment for somebody else. And the patient now is under May 4th. If you see, my appointment for May 4th has a different shade of color. So my appointment template, like the background of my scheduler, is like a light pink for established patients. But the moment I schedule this patient for a reason with a certain reason code, that reason code has its own color. So now that's that yellow that you see. So again, the background color, like this shade of pink, is the background color when there's no appointments. The moment you schedule a patient, the reason of why that patient's coming in has its own color set up, and that's the yellow. So eventually, as your day is filled with appointments, you might see a very colorful day there, depending on how your practice has set it up. So that is our process for rescheduling. We moved the appointment from one day to another day. Let's take a look at appointments. Let's take a look at it from a canceling perspective. So remember, canceling means the patient cannot come in and we don't have a future date to give them, or they're not moving it to a future date. We should always try to make sure that patient does get a future date appointment or return to clinic appointment. We should always do that. But in the event that the patient's not making another appointment, then we have to cancel it. By canceling it, as you saw, it will also free up that slot for a future patient. So I'm going to continue to use Brian Abner as an example. So my steps of canceling are very similar to rescheduling in the sense of how do you actually cancel. I can either cancel directly over by right-clicking directly over the appointment. I can choose to cancel by highlighting the appointment and pressing the cancel button. Or I can cancel by going to existing appointments. Those are three common ways. As you can see, it's the same three ways that we did reschedule. The only difference is that we are canceling instead. So you're going to be able to utilize whichever one you prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and utilize the right-click method. So I'm already on the schedule. Brian Abner already told me that he's scheduled to be seen May 4th at 10 a.m. So I am already on the appointment itself because the patient knew that. Remember, if the patient did not know when they were coming in, then you're going to have to use this existing appointment link instead. And you will reschedule or cancel through there instead. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click. And I'm going to choose Cancel Appointment. Once again, the system is going to ask me to choose a reason. Is it the patient that chose to cancel? Or did the doctor have an emergency and we're going through the list of appointments and the office chose to cancel? You're going to choose whichever reason is applicable to this cancellation. You can go as far as entering any cancellation notes as well. So we know the office canceled, but if you want to be a little bit more specific, that would be your notation down here. You may have noticed in my cancellation note box, there's a little quick text. Wherever you see notes, a note area in Intergy, there might be a little QT, a quick text icon on the far right or far left. And those are just predefined sentences. So instead of you sitting there and typing the reason why the office canceled, perhaps it's already set up to be a quick text. And the system can write the sentence for you, if you will. Again, all this has to be set up accordingly for you to utilize it. I'm just simply going to leave the code, office canceled. And now I'm going to go ahead and click Save. So that appointment is canceled. It is now in the patient's history as a canceled appointment, which I'll show you that in just a second. And the slot is now free for another patient. On the EHR side, the provider's My Day appointment list will also be updated accordingly as we reschedule, as we cancel. Let's take another look at our existing appointment link. If you're on the schedule itself, like we are, and you have your patient selected in the selection box, as I mentioned earlier, if the patient has appointments, upcoming appointment information, the existing appointment link will exist. If they have no upcoming appointments or no history, I should say, of future dates, then that existing appointment link will not exist. So because Brian Abner is my selected patient in the scheduler, I can click on existing appointments and it will show me his upcoming appointments, whether they are actually scheduled to happen, or they've been canceled, or they've been rescheduled. So Intergy does maintain the entire history of a patient's appointment. So for my patient, Brian Abner, he was scheduled for today, and it was canceled. It also shows me, if you take a look at the bottom, it also shows me who canceled it and why. So there's complete trace of who created the original appointment, which is this entry right here. And it also shows me the cancellation history as well. Take a look at the one for May 1st. That's the one that the patient chose to reschedule. So my status on the far right is rescheduled. Take a look at my notes on the bottom. It actually shows who originally created the appointment and who rescheduled it and why. And then we have the same thing for May 4th, which is canceled. So the patient is questioning perhaps when they need to come in. This is one way to tell the patient you're scheduled with Dr. Ford May 4th at 10 a.m. And we can also use the existing appointment link to cancel and reschedule as we did earlier. Right above the status column, there's an include history checkbox. So if you want to see past dates for this patient, you can click on include history, and that shows you prior appointments. Prior appointments past today. So remember the different type of statuses: canceled, rescheduled. The occurred status means they actually came in for their appointment. The patient was scheduled, they actually came in for their appointment, therefore it's an occurred appointment. They were checked in. And there's also statuses such as no-shows. So once you mark patients as no-show, it will document that as well. And let me scroll here until I find one in our test patient. Here we are. So once you mark your appointments as no-show, it will put that status as well. Now, we're looking at this window, this patient appointment window, because we accessed it through the scheduler by clicking on the existing appointments link. However, you can access the same window if you were in patient information. So you don't necessarily have to be on the scheduler to see that window. If you were in the blue man icon, if you were in patient information instead, I'm going to go ahead and minimize here. If you were in patient information instead, I can view that same information. So I'm going to go ahead and select my patient, Brian Abner. And on the left, here on the tree options, on the left, there's a scheduling menu. There's a scheduling option. And as you can see, it's the exact same window. One major difference here from looking at it from the patient information window versus the appointment scheduler is your action buttons. If you recall, while we were in existing appointments via the scheduler, if you recall, we had the option to reschedule. We had the option to cancel. We had the option to edit. You kind of lose some of those action buttons when you are in the patient information screen instead. As you can see, I don't have reschedule, but I do have cancel. But nonetheless, it is appointment information for the patient. So if the patient did not know when they're scheduled to come in and they're calling to double check, you don't necessarily have to be in the scheduler to know that information. I can go to the blue man patient information icon, pull up your patient, go to scheduling, and you see that all that history here. All right, so now that we've gone through some of the navigation or processes, I should say, of the appointment scheduler, we've gone as far as scheduling a new patient appointment, or I should say a new appointment. We went as far as canceling, rescheduling, and how to view existing appointments. We talked about the different methods that you can do these processes in. You can double click, you can right click, or you can use your action buttons. If you recall, while we were scheduling that patient, we were able to write notes in that appointment. If you wanted to gain access to that appointment window after they've been scheduled, that will be your View Edit appointment here on the bottom left. So let's say that Carla Abner let's say you've scheduled that patient, but perhaps you forgot to write the notes, the appointment notes, or perhaps you have to write some, add something to it. So the way I'm going to get into the appointment notes for Carla Abner's appointment on April 25th, I can either right-click and view edit my appointment, or I can click on view edit on the bottom left with the appointment being highlighted, that is. So Carla Abner's appointment is highlighted. I'm going to come down here to view edit. Now it's grayed out. I would actually have to go as far as edit again, and that allows me to add appointment notes in this box. You're going to go ahead and save. We'll talk about the conflicts in just a second. And there is your appointment with its appointment notes. I could have done the same thing through existing appointments. If I need to edit some appointment notes of a certain appointment, I have my edit button through there as well. So the next couple of items that I want to show you are those messages that the system might prompt you while you're scheduling. So we briefly talked about it earlier, where the system will prompt you with conflict messages being one of them. So for example, as I mentioned, conflict messages would be messages based on double booking or triple booking if that's what your organization permits. So I'm going to go ahead and try to force the system in scheduling another patient on a slot that's already taken. And we're going to cause a conflict message. So I'm going to go ahead and search for my patient. I'm going to click on the magnifying glass here. And let's say that Leslie Abner is the one we need to schedule. So now Leslie Abner is my selected patient. I need to schedule Leslie Abner for the same time that Carla Abner is scheduled in. So technically there's two patients already at 9:45, so I'm going to try to force a third one there. Again, Intergy allows you. Intergy allows you to double book, triple book, quadruple book. It all just depends on your organization's policy and what security rights these users have. So I'm going to schedule Leslie Abner for 9:45. So I'm going to double click on 9:45 and I'm going to enter the information for that. So I'm going to enter that her reason code is consultation. I'm going to put some appointment notes here. I've entered all the information I need as we saw earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. The system is now prompting me with a message. This is a conflict notification. Remember, conflict means double book. So this is a user that does not have the rights to double book. They will not be able to do so. If this is a user that has the rights to creating conflict, they're going to be prompted with that message. And they're going to be able to create conflict. So how do you force Leslie's appointment at 9:45 and make it the third appointment at 9:45? Well, all you do is press this button right here, create conflict. And now Leslie is my third appointment for that time slot. Because I'm looking at mode 1, they're right underneath each other. If I go back to mode 2, they're right next to each other. So as a reminder, creating conflicts is for double, triple booking. And you have to have the rights to do so. Another warning message, if you will, that you can be prompted here in Intergy is for override. Earlier on in our training, as I was explaining the navigation of the window, we talked about how the provider's schedule is a template, is a default template based on how it was set up, meaning 9:30 is designated for established patients. 10:30 is designated for new patients. So that's how this provider's template was created. Another type of warning message that users might encounter is the override. When, for example, the slot is reserved for new patients, but you're trying to force an established patient, or vice versa. You're trying to schedule a patient with a reason code that was not designated for that class, or a class, I should say, a reason class that was not designated for that slot. And the system will warn you and prompt you to override. If the user does not have the rights to override, they will not be able to make that appointment. It's all based on security access. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do that example. So Leslie Abner is an existing patient. And the slot that I have available, for example, is 10:30, which is reserved for new patients. And the same will happen if I try to schedule for other things like lunch. If the provider is scheduled from 12 to 1 for lunch and I'm going to try to give him a 12 o'clock appointment, I'm going to be prompted to override it. At 2 o'clock, the provider is scheduled for his admin time. If I try to schedule a patient for 2 o'clock, it will ask me to override, and I have to have the rights to do it. So let's say the 10:30 one, or the 2 o'clock one. I'm going to schedule Leslie for 2 o'clock. Perhaps the provider said it's okay. Again, it's all based on security and what your policy is internally. So I'm going to double click on 2 o'clock here, and I'm going to schedule this, and it tells me that that reason, that 2 o'clock slot is designated for admin charting time. But I'm going to go ahead and say that the patient needs to come in for a follow-up. I'm going to write in my notes. Before I click Save here, I want to point out to something that we haven't encountered previously in our previous examples, and that is the cell phone number here. When this patient was registered, we told the system that the patient's preferred phone number is the cell phone. That's why you see it in bold print and with the asterisk in it. So whenever we register patients and we say what their preferred phone number is for you to call first, essentially, will be indicated in bold text with the asterisk. The patient just happens to have one on file, but if we had 3, home and work, whichever one is in bold essentially is what they prefer for you to call first. All right, so I entered the details of that appointment, and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. So take a look at my warning messages. So in this case, it's not a conflict because I'm not double booking the provider. It's an override. Take a look at the reasoning for override. Override reserved slot with a new appointment. Again, that means that that slot was reserved for admin time. But I am trying to force a follow-up patient at 2 o'clock. So if I want to continue with this appointment scheduling, I have to click on override. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now there is the appointment now. I overrode what that slot was designated for originally. So creating conflicts is double booking, and you have to have the rights to do so in Intergy. It's all based on security. And if you want to schedule a patient different than what that slot was designed for, that is an override, and you too have to have the rights to do that. Okay. I want to go ahead and show you another option. It's actually a fairly new option. It came up a couple of features, a couple of upgrades ago, I should say. And that is the confirmed appointment feature. If you notice here, there's a C column. And this is something that needs to be enabled. So if you don't see that column, that C column here, please just double check with your internal IT staff, and they can reach out to HCN support need be for further assistance. The C column means confirm. So if your staff is calling patients to remind them of their appointments, I can actually mark my appointment as confirmed. And it's just a visual. That way, when you're looking at the schedule here, you get to see which ones have been confirmed, which ones have not. So let's say that I called Alice Aaron to remind her of her appointment. I got a hold of the patient and I was able to confirm the appointment. You can actually do this from patient flow tracking as well. But I'm going to go ahead and show it to you from here. So if Alice Aaron has confirmed her appointment, right from this window, I'm going to highlight Alice's appointment like I just did, and I'm going to right-click over her name. And there is your confirm appointment option. Right-click over the patient's appointment directly in the schedule and choose Confirm Appointment. What that will do is put a C in that column as a confirmation of appointments. Let me go ahead and do that on another patient here. So essentially what that will do is put a C in that column here, and that is your visual cue that the appointment was confirmed. As I mentioned, you can also do this from the patient check-in window from patient flow tracking. You can also confirm appointments from there also. So we've been using our action buttons. We've been using our right-click functionality. And a lot of the options that we have in right-click, you'll find it in your menus here at the top, your drop-down menus. So in your patient drop-down menu, you're going to see the option of select. That's where you can search for your patient, which essentially is the same thing as your magnifying glass. The next 4 options pretty much travel with you 90-some% of the areas that you go into Intergy. Notes, alerts, eligibility, and summary. So depending on who my selected patient is, I can go into that patient's notes. I can go into their alerts. I can run eligibility, or I can view their summary. Something else that you can do from the patient drop-down menu is access the last 5 patients you were on. So right now, our selected patient is Leslie. But what if I want to schedule or access Brian Abner? I don't have to search for his name all over again. All I need to do is go to the patient drop-down menu and jump into Brian Abner. So now if I do that, he is now my selected patient. So as long as you don't log off the system, or else that'll clear out your list, the system will always keep in track the last 5 patients you were on. You also have an appointment column. This is what your right-click option is. So whenever you right-click over an appointment and you get that drop-down list, you will see the same thing in your appointment drop-down menu. All the way at the bottom, it says Make Selected Patient. The way that works is, let's say you're on the schedule right now, you're in the appointment scheduler as we are, and the patient, the selected patient is Brian Abner. But you want to take a look at, let's say now you want to take a look at his account, his registration. That's when you're going to use the Make Selected Patient. Without that feature, you will find yourself going into the Blue Man, the patient information screen, and searching for Brian's name all over again. So what you're going to do is go to Appointments, Make Selected Patient. That way the system is keeping in memory that wherever I go to next is for Leslie. So Leslie is my selected patient. So now when I go to the Blue Man icon, when I go into patient information, her name is already my selected patient. I don't have to now search for her name all over again. Let's say it was Alice. I can right-click over Alice's appointment, make her the selected patient by choosing that option. So now when I go to patient information at the top, she is now the patient all the way at the top of the list. So save yourself any extra steps by utilizing these shortcuts that you have available. You also have a mode drop-down menu, which essentially is the same thing as your mode drop-down window here on the far right. So if you wanted to jump to mode 2, I can either click on it through here, or I can go to mode and choose it through here instead. There's a refresh option. As a reminder, overall in Intergy, refreshing is the F5 key on your keyboard. So if you wanted to instantly refresh your screen and bring it up to date or current, that will be F5 on your keyboard. The system is set to refresh ever so often, depending on what is set up in your organization. But if you want an instant refresh, you can press F5. You will see your screen flicker, and that would bring it up to date. Also, just to let you know, if you have various employees, various staff scheduling in Intergy, in the event that two people are trying to schedule for the same slot, it will warn you. The system will show you verbiage here that somebody is actually scheduling for that slot at this time. So there won't be any, it prevents any room there for errors on conflict and double booking. So the system does warn you if two people are scheduling for the same slot. Resource. We talked about resource, how we schedule by provider, which is what we're looking at right now. If we want to schedule for a room instead, that would be the room option. So those are your drop-down menus. We'll talk about reports in just a little bit. The next feature that I want to show you is searching. And this is definitely very useful for our organizations or our centers that are a lot busier, that perhaps their next appointment is a little bit far out. You're going to have searching capabilities. There's a couple of different search options in Intergy. And the one that comes with the system, the canned feature that comes with the system, is this search button here. So what searching allows you to do, it saves you time in searching for the next available slot. So again, if you're a busier clinic where you don't have upcoming close enough appointments that are available, perhaps you're a month out or 3 weeks out, or perhaps the patient has specifics. They can only come in on certain days and only want to be seen with Dr. Ford in the morning. That is what your search option will allow you to do. So instead of you sitting in front of the schedule, clicking on one day at a time to see when the doctor is available, use your search option at the bottom. So let's take a look at the search option. So here you're refining, these are your refinements here. Here you're telling the system, show me the appointments that the doctor has available on certain days, certain times, certain dates, or days I should say as well. So what you're going to do is put a time frame. Perhaps the patient has a preference also. Perhaps the patient says they can only come in within a certain time of days, etc. Perhaps they have specifics. So you're going to put an end date. You can go as far out as you prefer. Number of results. The system might come back with a lot of results, maybe more than 20. You can tell the system here number of results per page, because there's going to be an option to hit next, next page, next page. So how many results do you want per page is what this means. And that'll make a little bit more sense once we get there. If the patient is a new patient, maybe you only want to search for new patient slots. If the patient's coming in for a follow-up, then perhaps that's the slot you're going to search for. So let's see what we find here for training purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and search. The system is defaulting that my code is 15 minutes. I can choose to search for my non-templated slots as well. So perhaps this class wasn't used in the provider's template. I can choose to also search for those as well. If I leave it checked, I'm being strict here. I'm telling the system that I strictly want to see those time slots that were designated for standard office visits. I can choose to be a little bit more flexible if I needed to. It does default to 15 minutes, but you could change that. Here is my requested resource. Dr. David Ford's name is on it. That means that I only want to see Dr. David Ford's schedule. If I'm looking for a lab-only appointment, then perhaps I'm going to change it to rooms if your organization uses that feature. I can also go as far as choosing a location. So these are for our centers that have multiple locations, and perhaps Dr. David Ford goes to more than one location. I can go as far as selecting the location as well and be even more specific in my search. Now, to the far right are additional preferences. You know, maybe the patient doesn't have a preference of what time of the day they come in. In that case, it will probably be a full day. If the patient prefers rather in the morning, I might select AM or PM, or I can actually pick a certain time range. So you can be very detailed here. Maybe the patient does have a preference of day as well. So for our patients that perhaps only have Tuesdays and Thursdays off in their job, I can narrow it down to just those 2 days. It can be any day or any weekday. So what you will do now is click search. So now searching allows me to look for any available slot, any open slot based on that criteria. So I'm going to go ahead and click search. And the system is now showing me any slot, any standard appointment reason slot that is available for that provider. I could have chosen a different reason code or a different class code, and perhaps my search might have been different. But based on this test provider's template, it's just showing me everything that is standard appointment class related. And it tells you what your search criteria is at the top. So let's say that you're going down the list and the patient perhaps prefers another day. I'm going to go ahead and click on next here, and that shows me the next 20. For example, let's say we offer the patient April 28th at 10:15, and that works for the patient. If the patient agrees to that available slot, all you need to do is double click on it or click on Go To, and it takes you directly to that day where you will then continue with the scheduling. Let me go ahead and choose some other dates here. May 9th. May 9th at 11. If the patient is good with that date, we can click on Go To. If you need to start your search all over again and perhaps enter different criteria, then you would click on New Search instead, and you start your search process all over again. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Go To for that select highlighted appointment, and the system takes me directly to that day and that time slot. So if that patient agrees to that appointment, all you have to do is double click on that slot and make the appointment as we covered earlier. So definitely use the search tool when applicable. Again, as I mentioned, especially for patients that perhaps have specific criteria or preferences of when they need to be seen, or you're just trying to find in your busy schedules an open slot. So use the search criteria rather than just sitting there going appointment by appointment. Use those tools that definitely optimizes and facilitates your process a lot easier. Now, in this case, I chose May 9th at 11 a.m., but perhaps the patient has now changed their mind for May 9th. I don't have to run my search all over again. Look at my button at the bottom now. It still says search results. So what I can do is I can click there and my list of options come back up again. Maybe the patient now prefers the 12th instead. I can highlight the 12th, click go to, and now I'm on that day. And I can proceed with scheduling. So let's say we schedule that patient, and we're done. And now my button is just back to how it was originally, called search. The other search option that I mentioned to you that is available is somewhat of an advanced, it's actually called advanced search. So we saw what this search allows us to do, where we have certain criteria by reason code, one reason code, not multiple, one reason code, one provider. The advanced search feature allows me to have schedule the patient for different reasons, if you will, at a given time. Now, there is some prior setup involved for the advanced search. The feature actually has to be enabled as well. Once it is enabled in your organization, I can change my search button into advanced search by coming here to my mode drop-down menu. So if I go to mode and click on advanced search, my button now says advanced search. But again, there is some setup involved, and there is, you have to actually turn it on, turn the feature on for it to have access, for you to be able to have access to that. So the advanced search utilizes macros or groups of codes, if you will. So let's say you have a patient, a type of visit that requires maybe an initial visit, perhaps then another appointment for the procedure itself, and then maybe a third appointment for a follow-up. Those are macros, groups of codes, and that's what the advanced search feature uses. So let me show you how to actually utilize the feature. If your organization is interested in this module, please let us know. Reach out to HCN at any time, or funnel it through your immediate supervisor, and we can get the next steps on that going for you. So here in the advanced search, the first thing that it wants me to choose is the macro. So I'm trying to schedule Alice Aaron. And Alice Aaron is coming in for a wart removal. And your organization has a process for this type of appointment. Like I mentioned earlier, perhaps there's 4 different appointments that fall into the wart removal appointment. So instead of your users, the folks in your organization that makes the appointment, instead of them scheduling these appointments one at a time, there's extra steps there. But when you use advanced search, it allows me to search for open slots for all those 4 different appointments that the patient needs. And it makes scheduling a lot easier. So look at my wart removal example. It says that this appointment, or this type of appointment, has an initial visit, which is 1 appointment. It then has a surgical visit, the actual wart removal, let's say, that's 2 appointments now. And then lastly, it requires a follow-up. That's the 3rd appointment. So by using the advanced search, I am telling the system to search for the next available slots for all 3 type of appointments. at one time. So I'm going to go ahead and choose wart removal here. And now I'm looking at my advanced search. So here are my 4 different appointments here, the type of appointments. So the first thing I need is a consultation. The next thing I need is the surgery itself. And then perhaps I need to block the room also. Maybe there's a specific room for that surgical procedure. And then the last one is a follow-up. So in this one step, I'm going to schedule all 4 type of appointments for this patient. There's some action buttons here. I can add to this list. I can remove if something's not needed. And I can be specific in my searching down here, as we saw earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and just change my dates here. And I'm going to click search. So the system is searching. So the system is searching for my base appointment. This is that first visit, the consultation. So I'm going to go ahead and schedule the patient for the consultation. And then it's going to try to schedule for the other ones. So it's telling me that the patient should come in for their consultation on April 25th. But then I have some availability May 1st for the second appointment. And then I have some availability for May 8th for that third appointment. So because it's set up as a macro, a group, I can schedule all these appointments in one shot for this patient rather than doing them individually. So let's say I choose this May 25th here, or April 25th, I should say. I'm going to go ahead and schedule that, and there's your base appointment. There's that first appointment out of the 3. I'm going to save that one. Here's that second appointment that the system told us May 1st is available. I'm going to schedule that one too. And here's that third one that was available, which happens to be the room, because we need to reserve the room also. And then here's my 4th appointment, which is a follow-up after the surgery or after the procedure. And I'm going to save that one also. So because I use advanced search, it is so much easier to schedule for these appointments that are grouped together somehow because of a type of a procedure or of a type of visit. Imagine scheduling all those 4 appointments like we did earlier in our training, one by one, versus using the advanced search feature. So now I've scheduled all 4 appointments for this patient in one window. So definitely a lot easier, nonetheless. So as we wrap up our training, there's a couple of other items that I want to show you. And I want to show you how to mark appointments as no-show. And it's actually not done from here. We don't mark no-shows from the appointment scheduler. We do no-shows from the patient flow tracking module. So that's from your clock icon, patient flow tracking. That is an icon that you can also add to your toolbar like we did earlier in our training. Or you can access it from patient menu check-in. So marking a patient no-show is all dependent of your center policy. Some organizations mark patients as no-show within 15 minutes or within 30 minutes of a scheduled appointment. Some do it just at the end of the day. So no matter what your policy is internally, the process in Intergy is still the same. So from patient flow tracking, patients that are scheduled that have not arrived for their appointment are shaded in teal, are shaded in this blue color. So this list that we see here are essentially patients that have not arrived. If we are ready to mark our patient as no-show, all you have to do is right-click over it and click No Show. What that will do, it removes your patient from your patient flow tracking window. And it removes the patient from your, depending on your provider preferences back in the EHR side, it removes the patient from the provider list also on the EHR side, all dependent of that provider's preferences. It does not remove the patient from the scheduler though. Just removes it from your patient flow tracking. Essentially, it is still a scheduled appointment, they're just no show. Okay? So you're going to mark your patient as no show. And again, once we mark the patient as no show, we will be able to see that information in their history. The system maintains in their, as we saw earlier, in their patient's chart, all their no-shows. So if we now go to the patient's registration, go into their scheduling history, we will have no-shows marked in their history. A couple of other items that we saw from our scheduler that we can also do here in patient flow tracking. We can also confirm appointments through here, and we can also cancel appointments through here. So these are appointment scheduler features inside of patient flow tracking. And if you do confirm, it puts that little C on the confirm column. The last item I want to show you here is reports, report options that you have from the appointment scheduler. There's various reports that you can run. Ultimately, running the appointment report and printing it out is a user preference or policy of the organization. The provider on the EHR side does see all the patients that are scheduled to be seen. However, if you need a paper form of the appointment list, you can do that as well. Within the appointment scheduler module itself, there is a reports drop-down menu. And what you're going to see there are perhaps the more common reports that you can run from the scheduler, but not all the options. Those are not all your scheduler report options. I'll show you the entire list in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and show you the more common ones. Under reports, there is appointment details. So this is a common appointment report that you can use because it shows a lot of information about that appointment, and it also includes the patient's phone number. So if you are looking to use a report for appointment reminders, you could use appointment details report. You would select your filter options, and you would click Run here. And then the appointment report comes up on your screen, and you can still choose to print it out if you want it to. And that was appointment details. Another report that you can run from the reports drop-down menu here is the daily eligibility report. So this is an eligibility report that you can run for your automatic eligibilities and your manual eligibilities. So if you run it ahead of time, perhaps for future appointment dates, then you're mostly looking at your AEVs, your automatic eligibility verification entries. If you're running it today or any time today, it also includes your manual eligibilities, the eligibilities that somebody is doing manually in Intergy, not the automated ones. So this is another report that you can choose to run from here. And you would enter your preferences, your filtering options, and run the report. And that will show you your eligibility that's been done so far. And because we are in our training environment, we don't have any actual verifications, but it will list you the patient's name and their status, their eligibility status. And if they are inactive or if it errored out, it would give you a reason as well. So this will show you all eligibility that's been done for this date of service. Now, the last report I want to show you is not actually in the appointment scheduler itself. You have to go to the reports module. And you're actually going to see a lot more scheduling reports from there. I'm going to go to the reports module, and I'm going to press select. So I went to reports, select. And on the left, you have scheduling. The one I want to show you is called Appointments with Expired Slide. As we know, when the patients come in for their appointment, we want to make sure that their slide is updated in the event that it has expired. So we want to educate and prepare our patients to come prepared for their appointments if their income information has been expired or soon will expire. So my Appointments with Expired Slide is a report that I can run and use to when I need to verify, or when I need to confirm appointments. Because this report will also show me and indicate the patients whose slide has expired or has no slide information or is about to expire. So let's take a look at it. Appointments with Expired Slide. I'm going to go ahead and choose some future date ranges here and click Run. So now this is telling me that I have some appointments here who either do not have slide information or whose slide is set to unknown, which is something we should not be doing, and a date of service or an expired date. So now when I call these patients to remind of their appointment, I can also remind them to bring income information because it needs to be updated. So definitely utilize these reports when you're running your appointments list or updating your patients' appointment reminders. So that concludes our training for our appointment scheduler. I do thank you for joining. I'm going to go ahead and open the lines for questions.